night, whichever part of the world and whatever time zone you're joining us from. Welcome! Welcome to the 2023 edition of the Black Consciousness Festival, where we're focusing on healing and reconnection for a second year. The Black Consciousness Festival is a global platform that connects people of African descent with each other by sharing and encouraging exchange through information, traditions, histories, intentions, traumas, celebrations, legacies, stories connecting to pride, power, and practice. Our inaugural year was in 2020, where we created a month of conversations and activities around topics of Black consciousness. In 2021, we had a few events: a youth festival, a weekend of conversations and reparations, and in November, conversations on shift, as we explored the many ways in which we as people of African descent shared and rebirthed elements of ourselves. In 2022, we focused on healing and reconnection for the first time, and we've decided to continue that theme this year because it's so important for our soul. The recordings of all of these conversations are available on our website, theblackconsciousnessfestival.com, and our YouTube channel. As you listen to the conversations, we encourage you to be kind to yourself. Pause, breathe consciously, move, and appreciate all that you are. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome us all to this lovely conversation on placemaking reflections on our species. My name is Erica Ashton. Joining us in this conversation, we have Sean Samad, Dawn Cumberbatch, and Akley Olton, all of us from the Caribbean. So we give thanks. We give thanks for that. Before we start, I want to send some healing energies to Denisa David, who was supposed to join us on this conversation. So sending her some healing, love, and light, and inviting us into a space of gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunity to be here, to share, to connect, to work through our own healing, to talk through some of the things which are challenging us. So we give thanks for all of that. We give thanks for the ancestors who are with us, walking with us, guiding us, letting us know that they're with us. So we give thanks for that. And we give thanks for all those persons who are listening in. We give thanks for them. We give thanks always. So thank you. Welcome, Sean. We'll take some time to just introduce ourselves. So I'm inviting Sean to start. And this is my first start in terms of directing it. It's going to flow differently from here on. So.
Hi, good night, everyone. To everyone watching, my name is Sean Samad. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I am a Brazilianist, somebody who loves Brazilian culture. I love learning in general and culture in general. I'm a teacher and student all in one. That's me.
Thanks, Sean.
And I guess we will move on to Dawn. So Dawn, tell us a bit about yourself.
I was waiting for the volunteer, but all right.
Thank you for inviting me to have this conversation with you all tonight. I truly appreciate it. Just in a nutshell, I'm a screenwriter and archivist and researcher. I'm co-founder of the Caribbean Memory Project as well as Google Island Productions. I own the boutique film and television and event company. I wear many hats in addition to those things. Most recently, I've had the honor of working with both Sean and Erica on Project Food Speaks that takes a look at the naming practices, the colonial naming practices that used to change the naming places.
So Dawn, I think, Dawn, you hearing me?
Hearing me?
Yeah, I think you're very soft.
Your audio is really soft, yeah.
Yeah, you're very soft. So I was wondering if you need to adjust something.
Let me take off my
It might be the headphones.
Is it better now?
A little.
Take this off.
Still soft.
Is that better?
Yeah, a little better.
I'm not hearing you at all.
All right. While you're adjusting that, we can invite Akley to talk about
Yeah,
himself.
you're hearing me?
Much better. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hello?
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So it was the headphone. Sorry about that. So in addition to doing film and events, I work with both Sean and Erica. I've had the pleasure most recently
I
to
want
work
Dawn,
with you
before
all
you
on project.
continue, I want to ask you to start from the top because we weren't hearing you. So,
Oh,
so if you could start, yeah.
sorry about that. So I let me just reiterate my gratitude for the invitation to have this conversation. Um, I'm a screenwriter, an archivist, and researcher. I am also the co-founder of the Caribbean Memory Project, and most recently, I've had the pleasure of working with Sean and Erica on Project Namescapes that seeks to address a lot of the colonial naming practices we've still retained here in Trinidad and Tobago. So as the evening goes on, I'm sure more of who I am will reveal itself. So I'll
Yes.
send it over to Akley.
Thank you. Yeah, I would also like to express my gratitude for the invitation to be in this conversation, and even more gratitude, for the journey that lead me to a place to be able to have this conversation. And yeah, I'm a filmmaker and visual artist from St. Vincent, but maybe more specifically, like I'm a guy from St. Vincent who really think that there's lots of opportunity in cultural industries, and I guess it's a place where there's I guess a challenge when it comes to developing cultural industries and cultural projects, and I kind of like took on filmmaking as my kind of like mission, and I've been like finding a way, freestyling and to build a career as a filmmaker within the Caribbean and as a visual artist, and that takes many forms, whether it's producing or teaching or even physically, out there running and gunning with the camera. There's different aspects to it, but yeah, I've managed to manifest a few opportunities over the years, and through these opportunities and also through my own personal journey to understand who I am, I got into developing documentary films about Caribbean history, and I think that is the reason why maybe I was asked to have this conversation. And for me, it's kind of like a kind of like reparatory move even before I knew about reparations, because I was trying to heal myself. I was trying to understand who I was and why my society, was how it was, and how to just confront that. So, a guy from the islands trying to figure out life and using art to foster the changes he wants to see in his society. That's who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Akley. Sean, you wanted to share something with us.
Yes, it's actually a piece of work, an article that was done in the Sierra magazine. And for those who might not be familiar with it, the Sierra Club, which is the organization that produces this magazine, is the United States' oldest, largest, and most influential grassroots environmental group. And so they have this magazine where they publish things about everything concerning the environment. And this particular piece of work, I think, is very applicable to what we're going to discuss tonight. And it's entitled "What's in a Name: What It Means to Decolonize a Natural Feature." And so I'll just share an excerpt from it. It starts, "There are hundreds upon hundreds of them, by one count, more than 800. They are mountains, valleys, creeks, lakes, and other physical landmarks with one thing in common. They all have the word squaw in their name. The exact derivation of squaw is unclear. Some etymologists say that it's an Algonquin word for woman. Others say that it's a mistranslation of the Mohawk term for vagina. In any case, it's inarguable that over the centuries the word became a misogynistic and racist slur directed at indigenous women, a means of using language to demean. Yet the word is etched across the American landscape. There are at least 1,400 places across the United States whose official name contain a racial slur of some sort. By far the most common epithet is squaw. Last November, Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, a member of the Laguna Pueblo, vowed to change that. Secretary Haaland announced the creation of a formal process to review and replace derogatory place names. She also officially classified the term squaw as offensive and created a federal task force to find replacement names. Racist terms, she said, have no place in our vernacular or on our federal lands, Haaland said. Our nation's lands and waters should be places to celebrate the outdoors and our shared cultural heritage, not to perpetuate the legacies of oppression. Haaland's initiative is just one part, though the most prominent and potent one, of a larger nationwide effort to revise and rewrite the names of places and landmarks that contain offensive terms. The ability to name a place is a form of power, and all too many colonial place names are hatred inscribed upon the land. But power can also be reclaimed and recovered by the marginalized. Name changing is more than just the acknowledgement of the United States' history of brutality towards indigenous peoples. It signals a desire to account for this past and to hold and to build a future that holds the possibility of righting profound wrongs. Erasing the maps, the slurs that once graffitied them, is a way of affirming and respecting the pre United States existence of those who were dispossessed.
Thank you. And so we're looking at that idea of reparations, that idea of righting or wrong, that idea of being intentional around how we name and what we name, and looking at that in terms of our own spaces, St. Vincent, Trinidad and Tobago, some of the names that we continue to carry. And so if you could share a bit about that, some of the things we've seen, how we feel, how it's impacted us on this journey to healing. So Akley, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, sure. I guess the first thing that came to mind for me is I guess the journey to discover, I guess, the story of my own name. In St. Vincent, my family is the only family in the phone book with this last name, and it's like a fragmented. Well, I inherited like a fragmented history, if that makes sense, because my grandmother, who I grew up with, was a white lady, like a descendant of the planters, or maybe, well, I guess English, right? But that's how I started to like get bits and pieces of who I was, and in a kind of a way, it propelled me on a journey, and I discovered that my talent was to create images, and it took me on a journey to kind of like discover myself, and through that, I discovered what was going on around me, you know. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a lot of the colonial legacy is still very much alive in places and in names of places. Um, there is also the memory of the indigenous people, because there are places that still has very indigenous words like Leyu and Yambu. These words are not British, they're not French, they're not Spanish. But sometimes in the everyday of the Vincentian, pay attention to those things. um, I remember one time there's a community called Oia, which is one of the most northern areas of St. Vincent, and I was in a bus with some Garifuna people who sort of came back to St. Vincent on a pilgrimage, just listening, filming, capturing their journey. And one of them explained to me, who lived on the island my whole life, what Owiya meant. And Owiya is syllables, and it when you translate it to English, it means we'll die here, you know. And for me, that was just a place, they have a salt pond, a nice beach, and that's what it was for me. I sort of like got a whole different portal into the imagination of what the island was and what it could have been and what happened in that area, you know. And that's just one space on one island. As we go across the Caribbean, the Spanish Caribbean as well, and the French Caribbean, there's so many stories that are memories, time capsules of what happened back then. And it's really sometimes it's really for us to imagine if it is we want to confront the trauma that we still kind of carry, you know.
I mean, that reminds me a lot of Tobago and all the different influences evident in the names that you find around Tobago. You have Dutch names, you have French names, you have English names, and then you have these very kind of functional names like Doctor Road, and so it's this very almost decorative thing on one end, and then something really plain and functional, but and then a bunch of stuff happening in the middle, that if you don't interrogate it, it just becomes part of the, like the everyday. But the everyday places so much upon us that we don't even really kind of take the time to process, and that's why this namescapes project that we're doing is really critical, because it gets people to confront the space you're living in. A space without people connected and engaged in a particular way remains just a space. It's not, a place that enriches us, that contributes to our health, our mental well-being. A lot of the, kind of revitalization projects we see happening, the first objective is economic development,
Yes.
investment, things to attract, foreign direct investment. And at the same time, the realities on the ground are forcing the very people who make that space a place to want to leave, because we're not necessarily dealing with the impacts, that have been ignored for a very long time. So we're doing two things at the same time, right? We're sowing this idea that the grass is greener, but at the same time, we're pushing out the people on the ground, the people who contribute to the culture with their memories, with their experiences, their lived experiences, their trials, their trauma. We're getting, we're encouraging them in a very tacit kind of clandestine way to feel that elsewhere is better. So then we have access to the space to promote our economic agenda.
But John, I just want to jump in quickly and say, as you were talking about Tobago, I remember many years ago when I was studying abroad, there was a girl from Latvia in the class, and she walked up to me one day and said, my people colonized your country," and I was like, "What?" I was so confused. And she's like, "Yes," and I'm like, "What do you mean?" And then she started explaining to me that Latvia used to be called Courland, the Duchy of Courland. Right.
Yep.
They had for some time been in Tobago. And after she explained it, I was a little bit ashamed, because of course I had not made that connection myself, right? And I didn't know the history of it, but you're absolutely right. Courland is all over Tobago, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not we know the connection between the name of the spaces and the history, I'm sure some Tobagonians know, but I didn't. So that wasn't, that came to me when you were talking about it.
And that should be something that everybody, at least every Tobagonian should know. The history that, at least when I did history in school, it wasn't necessarily our history. We might get fragments of it through the social studies curriculum, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the history and the education curriculum in general, it's all outward looking. So education plays a really big part in in that in nurturing this desire for elsewhere, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So you have physical deterioration of the places that we live, a lack of maintenance generally in terms of the culture of things. Um, but then the education system, a colonial education system that is still very much in place, is inculcating a desire for, you know, elsewhere, inculcating a kind of inferiority, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I feel for years I kind of was like, you know, like when you go on a mountain and you say, "This is my cause, and I will stick to it." Yeah, nothing can move me. And I shared the same sentiment as you, where I felt like I wanted to I wanted to learn how to be a filmmaker, but I wanted to do it in the Caribbean. So I didn't even want to go to a university in another place. I didn't, you know, it had to be in the Caribbean. And then you know, and then I wanted to like make be a filmmaker, be actively working, but it must be in the Caribbean, you know. So all of the opportunities to migrate, yeah, I would go and I would do something somewhere, but I would always come back home, you know. I would always try to come back home. And I feel maybe 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 in walking home, maybe in walking, um being able to like communicate globally from home. I don't know, or maybe it's COVID, or maybe whatever it is, you know. But I think things get to a certain place where I feel like I don't even want to feel like I have to live on an island. I want to live in the world, right? So all of these
Mm-hmm.
boundaries and borders and passports and visas and all of these things,
Mm-hmm.
um, with gratitude, you know, like my journey has allowed me to like experience a lot of that, and I feel like it's very stifling, you know. and in St. Vincent, I would hear stories about people saying, oh, this whole place was a highway, and it used to be canoes going up and down all the way, and everything was interconnected. And you know, and I could see, when I hear that, I could see like trade, because when you look at the sketches of the canoes, they would have one with full of food, and you know, and you could see bartering and things going on, and I could imagine all kind of things about how life could be, how is, in some ways, because we still live some of that, you know, in some ways, in some parts, in some villages, you know. Sometimes, like you say, we have this tendency to call those memories or those experiences rural, and some
Yes.
people some of us were sort of like trained to look at that with disdain, and with like a kind of like resentment.
Mm-hmm.
It's backwardness,
Mm-hmm.
but that
Mm-hmm.
is that is like the core of our culture, you know, of tapping into that indigenous memory, like how to move underground and how to live with what you had. In COVID, everybody in Vinci went back to drinking this thing we call trumpet bush, and it's a thing that does just grow wild. It's like a big leaf, the underneath is white, and everybody was drinking that. And when you Google it, you see scientifically it's like good for your bronchioles and to strengthen respiration. And everybody knew that, like intrinsically, because you grew up in this space, right? But it wasn't until COVID forced us to really look at what we have on the ground that we figure out, you know, yo, I have this resource that the rest of the world doesn't have. And the experience of COVID in St. Vincent was very, you know, very interesting, because in my opinion, a lot of people became very indigenously health conscious, because it was like I go
Yes.
to the supermarket, I sick, I go to the doctor, you know, I have to contact people. So let me go to the bush.
hmm. To our
Don, one of
credit,
the
sorry, Sean, go
sorry.
ahead. You go ahead.
No, I was gonna say one of the things, as you were talking about the education system, and and Akley as well, talking about his experience, that came to mind was this notion also of signage and the role that signage plays in almost like an informal uh, education, right? So we kind of learn how to refer to places by the signage that exists. And I wonder. I'd like to ask Akley about that in St. Vincent. We could talk about our experience here in Trinidad and all of the issues around, for example, when the government decided to put the signs on the streets in Port of Spain in English and Spanish, and people were like, "What pack of nonsense is this? Like, you don't go to another country that speaks a different language and see signs in English. The signs are the signs, and you know that a sign on a street is the name of the street, and you figure it out, right?" But how has signage been used in St. Vincent to kind of mark spaces, if it has been at all?
Hmm. Um, Signage in St. Vincent, in my opinion, is of two types. There is commercial signage, billboards. There is also three types: commercial signage, what religious Christian signage. They have a big poster of white Jesus. For a long time. I wanted to give him a flambeau, but and is this poster that's been there my whole life? The white Jesus that they have in they used to have them on the almanacs back in the day when I was
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We
give
know
it
that.
out to everybody. Yeah, but
The white one with the red hat.
yeah, with the yes, with the blood. Right. So so there's that kind of signage, and the regurgitation of that, and then there is tourism signage.
Mm.
And then tourism signage is interesting because for me, in a kind of a way, I think tourism is kind of like nefarious, like evil, because for me, a lot of it brings back the plantation dynamic on the
Mm-hmm.
island.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
so then go ahead.
I seen it never left.
It never left.
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly. But the dynamics. So I want to say something later in relation to that. But so it's like tourism signage, and then the tourism signage sometimes exploits the indigenous and the historic trauma.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting. There are also signage that honor the colonial memory
Mm-hmm.
and the actual genocide of the indigenous people. And
Mm-hmm.
as a child growing up, I didn't really pay attention to these things. It was like, oh, there's a monument, but then when you grow up and you read and you learn about it, it's kind of like it makes you really like reflect on like what's really going on in this community that I live in, because in a way it's like we honor the memory of whiteness, of the
Yeah.
colonials who constructed the space, and in a way now, right, we maintain the rituals in the everyday, like we
Mm-hmm.
carry on their legacy by practicing what they do. Like at independence, we put up the same things they put up in England, the flyers and the
Yeah.
flags. We practice the
Yeah. We
same.
march. Yep.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
in kind of traveling, like leaving the island and coming back, and I'm very like rooted, like I'm not like from a fortunate background. So I go home, I come back, I'm on the bus, I'm like moving all over the place, and I'm on the ground with the people. And something that really stood out to me one time was seeing the police, right, walk, like three police officers walk from the police station in Bay Street over to the courthouse, right? It's like a ritual that's been happening every single day, or every single time they have parliament, you know? Like, and that actual walk over, that is the colonialism continuing, like in the actual continuing of the process, you know? And like it was like seeing something that I had not ever noticed or taken for granted. Just like it was like as if my eyes were opening and seeing like what was going on around me, as the more I read and the more I went into like how things happened in the past, the more like curtains and veils were removed from my eyes about what's happening in the present.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I find that interesting in terms of the dynamic when it comes to confronting some of the challenges, like you mentioned, with education, and how we could imagine a better future.
I wanted
You know,
to sorry, Erica, go ahead.
go
Go
ahead,
ahead. You
Dawn.
go
You
ahead.
go ahead.
No, I
No, you
wanted
go
to
ahead.
talk.
Because I was going to move the conversation to namescape. So go ahead.
Okay,
Yes.
I just wanted to kind of talk about, who's actually was talking about the kind of rural life, and in a lot of ways we kind of seem to throw out the baby with the bathwater and focus a lot on this kind of urbanism. You know,
Mm-hmm.
everybody must have a car. Everybody, and there's a lot of contempt that people experience in neighborhoods all across, Trinidad, specifically Trinidad and Tobago. And it's I don't think it's a conscious contempt, but in our times, it kind of has to be looked at that way, where you will get 100% financing to buy a car, but it's too hard to build some pavements for people to, if they choose to walk,
To walk.
to
Yeah. Yeah.
experience nature. A place as
Yeah.
lovely as our our original capital, St. Joseph.
Yeah. Yeah.
Full trees, and it's there's a river on one side and mountain on the next, and nobody ever thought, well, let's put, make it accessible so that people can,
Mm-hmm.
if they, if you're going to hike, you have to drive to the waterfall to get to Maracas waterfall,
Mm-hmm.
And it's just this culture that I really don't understand. But on the flip side, there has been, I think, in recent years, a very concerted effort to indigenize, or to refocus on indigenous culture and rural culture. With, you have a lot of community museums, some of them a little problematic, yes, but there's this kind of hyper local activity going on. People having little markets. There was a little market. There was a big festival in Brasso Seco a couple of weeks ago. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we are on the right path in certain ways, but it's an uphill battle. Because
Mm-hmm.
the predominant mentality is that you're supposed to aspire, not to be a pedestrian. you know so
Yeah.
even if it's a choice that it's better for my health, better for my mental well-being, that you're kind of forced into certain choices just to stay sane,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, either that is exposure, to other issues. So anyway, that was what I
So,
wanted to say.
and as you're saying that too, I'm also thinking, about our acceptance of what is not standard, or substandard. So I'm thinking about that walk into the waterfall in Diego Martin, where
Yes,
somebody
exactly.
years ago had carved out a path, and the path has collapsed. And you basically, if you want to get to the waterfall, you're endangering your life, because you're walking on the edge of a cliff to go
Yeah,
down.
yeah,
And you look at it and you think, but there's not a lot of work to do to rebuild that, because part of the challenge with not engaging in the space and fixing things is that we deny access to people. So an older person who wants to go to the waterfall, it's challenging. Somebody on a wheelchair, if you're not able, and I'm looking at some of the pavements we have, how they up and they down. If it is you're not careful, you could fall. So all of these things, it doesn't make it easy to walk, and it doesn't provide access for people who need that kind of access. And the challenge is that we don't get up and talk about it or protest about those things. We seem to think
yeah,
it's normal, it's how it should be. like, we're probably not deserving of better. But,
Mm-hmm.
we will go abroad and come back and talk about how abroad looks or what is happening out there, and not seeing
Yeah.
that, part of the challenge is our acceptance of what passes.
Yeah.
And that's the problem is that it, and that's what kind of placemaking reveals, right? If
Mm-hmm.
people are not at the center of the development of the space, if economic considerations take precedence, that's what's going to happen. So you're going to get box drains. Obviously they're functional, they relieve flooding and so on. But how are they built? Are they built, with
The
any
standard.
standards? Yeah. Are they
Yeah.
able to be multifunctional? So could we put a sidewalk on top of this?
Mm-hmm.
And even when they do,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sometimes they leave gaps. There's the big kind of concrete cap that you could trip on.
The
Certainly,
heights
nobody in
at
a
the
wheelchair
front from one side to the next.
exactly. So we have
Yeah.
a lot of things happening simultaneously that seem like development, but don't necessarily take the actual day-to-day realities of people on the ground into consideration.
Yeah, yeah, because
You know,
development is not the economics, it's about the people. And if we're not
it's
able
about,
to see ourselves and able to move, then are we
yeah,
really developing? Are we really successful? Yeah.
yeah.
So I want to shift into talking about project namescapes, that big discovery that was made. I don't know if Sean wants to start us off on that, because I know Akley has a project, a similar type project in St. Vincent. So we'll talk about that. So,
So project namescapes, basically, the origin of project namescapes. And Erica's laughing at me because she's probably like, he's probably fed up with talking about this. But the origin of project namescapes is, of course, rooted in research that was done by the University College of London's Centre for the Study of British Legacies of Slavery. It's a long name. And they were engaged in compiling data on all of the ex-British colonies, which includes St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and all of the estates that were located in these ex-colonies. And the overall purpose of the establishment of the database, I think, was to track the compensation that was paid to plantation owners after emancipation of the enslaved, right? And so it started with our discovery of that database and perusing the database specifically for Trinidad and Tobago, and making the recognition that the names of the estates, as they would have been around 1834, the abolition of slavery, are still the names that we utilize in our places today. They remain the names of our towns, our residential areas, mostly, and not randomly used. Not like it was a plantation in Port of Spain and then it's used in San Fernando. No, it's being used in the exact same locations where the plantations existed, and so we started to talk to people around and ask them, did they know the origin of these names? And 99% of the people did not know. And when we explained to them that these names come from the name of the estate or the plantation that was in the space, you could see the visible horror on their faces. And so we decided it was definitely a project about awareness that ties into Black consciousness that we wanted to work on. And so Project Namescapes is supposed to be creating a visual narrative and building some awareness around the origin of the names that are still very present and utilized in our national landscape that most people are probably unaware of.
and I think that unawareness, I see it too. So the names are still there, and then you see in some of the newer housing areas, some of those same names are being used.
Yes, definitely. I saw one recently in Cuba, I think, a new residential area. And of course, they give names to these housing projects. And it was using the name of the estate. Yeah, That was another.
Yes, yes. So there's that lack of awareness then that we continue to promulgate this thing, because we don't know the history of the names, and so we continue to use them, not seeing that we are erasing ourselves and
And
not
Erica,
helping our healing.
and in many ways also in a kind of bubble is not the right word, but that's the word that's coming to me. And an example of that is that recently in the UK, in the area or the town that Picton came from, they made moves to remove his name from certain things and remove his name from certain institutions and whatnot because of the discovery of the kind of governance and leadership that he had in Trinidad, for example.
Trinidad.
And yet Picton's name occurs in
So
Trinidad like a fractal. His name is everywhere, all over the place,
everywhere. Yeah.
and we have
Picton
not
Fort,
even, yeah, we have not
Picton
even
Street.
started. There are multiple Picton streets in Trinidad, multiple, right,
Yes.
in different
Yeah.
areas. Picton, yeah, and we have not even though that was done in his hometown in the UK, there wasn't even a peep in Trinidad about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, we certainly translated it to Spanish. So
That we did. There's Calle Picton and Picton Street on the sign. Yes.
Really? Oh yes, yeah, 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 with those making us what was it? Spanish focused. Yeah.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
bilingual.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and it's
Bilingual.
weird,
Yes.
you know, we're not bilingual. I think only now because it's used in Venezuela, we're kind of being forced to be. But for so many years, we turned our back on South America. Like we're literally closer to Venezuela than we are to Tobago geographically, you know, and we we wait till we get into secondary school to start. I'm like, language is best learned at a very young age. Why are
Mm-hmm.
we waiting? Even if you wanted to put economic development as, the reason for doing things, then that's a big reason to do stuff because but that's part of the plantation dynamics, right? To keep us
Mm-hmm.
focused north and
Yes.
dependent, So that is
Yes.
all by design,
Yeah.
you know.
And we get distracted by that, because we latch onto the conversations and we start having big discussions about them, losing the focus of what really we should be, on, about minding our own business. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Mhm.
that's like sorry, Akley, go ahead.
No, no. Oh, well, I was going to say, well, it's a very old story, and
Mm-hmm.
I guess in the case of Saint Vincent, it's this memory shows up, or the thing when you spoke about the person when they discovered that like where their name came from the plantation, like they felt
Mm-hmm.
like horror. So I feel like in the absence of dealing with this horror, what we have is a sort of like um national amnesia that we're just like comfortable with. So we
Mm-hmm.
don't
Yeah,
confront the
that's
trauma of what the past generates
Yeah.
and makes you feel like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you know,
Mm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
sort of like a victimhood. So we put on this tough exterior by ignoring it, and
Mhm.
pretending
Mm-hmm.
like it's
It
not
doesn't
what,
exist.
right.
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
when you go through the phone book in Saint Vincent, from front to back, you'll see French names, Baptiste, you know, who else? Maybe no, well, Baptiste for sure is French. There's a few other French names. Then when you go,
Mm-hmm.
you'll also see like what I used to consider to be English names, British names, and through a project I did with the University of Wales, I saw to like I said, veils were open from my eye, and I started to see that it wasn't like it wasn't English names, it was Scottish names, and it
Mhm.
was Welsh names, and it was
Mm-hmm.
like Saxon names, and it was so then you could kind of like get kind of like different understanding. And then it went so far that one of my friends was his a good brethren of mine, like we grew up together, high school, and his last name was Roberts. And I never really thought of it. He never really think of it either. He just know himself to be a Roberts. But he decided to what he decided to do as a profession was to join the British forces. So he did the exam and he passed and he get through. And when he got there, they put him in a Welsh regiment. And like when I told them I was doing this project and that Roberts it's a Welsh name that means a Welsh planter came to St. Vincent and set up shop. He was like, "Oh, so that's why they put me in this regiment." And he never really understood, like why they put him in a Welsh regiment, you know. And I feel like that's the Vincentian day where you really don't think of is you think of everybody as like white people or English people, and you don't really get down to the core of what it means to have a name. You know, for example, there are lots of people called Brown. Brown. Brown means you are mixed race, or you are the descendant of somebody who was mixed race. And then there are like two different Browns. There's Brown, and then there's Brown with a E. And in Wales, when you put brown knee or you put knee as somebody's, it means you are like the descendant of Brown, you know. And even Roberts, there's Robert's son. That literally means like the son of Roberts,
Son of
you know.
Roberts. Yeah.
And that's what some of these names mean. I'm still trying to figure out what my name means. And it has its own story, and it's really kind of beautiful because since social media happened, you get to like see people from all over the world, and you see that your name doesn't just exist in the Caribbean, it's in Latin America, it's in all of these other places. And then that could bring us to beautiful Trinidad. And the first time I come through Piaco, I was like, oh, they have Spanish signs and English signs.
And
But back then I
signs,
was, yeah, I remember. Yeah, yeah. But back then it was
real,
very confusing.
yeah,
Excuse me, what was that?
imagine. No, there was a braille sign at the airport. You'll remember that?
Yes.
When they put the braille sign up,
When you were
braille was
leaving the
tactile thing.
airport. Yeah.
When to the
Yeah.
parking, they had a braille sign up on a building, which was, inclusive but kind of impractical.
Yeah. And that
So
happens when we don't think
that's
through some of the things we
yeah,
want to do,
think
you know?
stuff. We
Yeah.
not throw a blast and okay, we
Mhm.
inclusive, but it's not. That's not how braille is used.
Mhm.
But
Right.
I was thinking about what Akley was saying in terms of the names in Saint Vincent, and I just had a question in terms of as I guess a monoculture, right? And tourism must play a big role in preserving a lot of those structures. Have you engaged with those dynamics in your work?
Yeah. Well, a project I've been developing for a while now. It's called Hyrule, Land of the Blessed. It's literally about a guy who confronts his reality and goes on a journey to sort of like rediscover his ancestral memory. And it starts with him seeing these paintings by Augusto Bernays of paradise, the trophies that the colonials took back to the New World and sort of created the illusions of fantasy in these other places across the sea. That's the beginning of tourism. That's how it started, by attracting more
Mhm.
partners to come with paintings and stories of profits and lavish lifestyles and of the
Mhm.
bounty of the West.
Mhm.
That's how tourism and commerce kind of started. But it developed in a way now where these places that we live on are like in some ways sort of like the bohemian fantasy is sold to everybody everywhere as the tourism.
Mhm.
And that bohemian fantasy keeps the rituals, the systems that kind of like keep people divided but and keep people in servitude. And
Yeah.
it's a big machinery, and St. Vincent is
Yeah.
one of the places where it plays out at the highest levels. I mean,
Mhm.
Mystique, the 1% lives
Oh,
there, you know?
that horror
And
story.
yeah, and that's
Mhm.
in COVID, it was crazy because that places exist legally and politically
Mm-hmm.
outside of how St. Vincent operates. So let's say
Mm-hmm.
if a crime happens on the island, then the police have to go and deal with the owners of the resort, and or they have to be reported to St. Vincent, and then it has to be it's not like regular Vincentian life. It's a whole other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of spaces like that that are very like exclusive to certain people and not so exclusive to other people, and they do it very creatively. Sometimes it's pricing, you know
Mm-hmm.
a place that costs $1,000 a night, or a place that
Mm-hmm.
costs 20,000 US dollars a week. That's not a
Mm-hmm.
place that the regular Vincentian can afford. And
Mm-hmm.
then you see that some things, activities, like I said, tourism, the spaces that are created. Yes, they're created to appreciate the local, but it's more for the foreigner to appreciate, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And um, and then we get to some crazy things like the river down the road from my house is a park. Yeah, it's a nice spot, but I understand if a tourist come through and they have to pay a fee, to, contribute to the upkeep. But I feel I shouldn't have to pay a fee because I live there. There's
Yeah.
these kind of conversations that you have to have with tourism and how it operates and how it sort of like exploits without taking
Mm-hmm.
consideration for like local culture. And
Mm-hmm.
and then we buy into it. We want the
Yeah.
money, we want it to work.
Yeah.
We want to sell our
And
necklaces and
yeah.
yeah.
And it's easy, I think, too, for governments. I think they think it's easy, because if you have to focus on people development, it means you have to get creative with developing the people you have in your country. But if it is you decide to go for the tourism thing, it's, you train everybody up to be a good server or a good whatever, and you figure you've solved the problem. But at the end of the day, we're not helping our people to heal. We're not helping our people to see themselves and to see their possibilities. And that, I think, is the challenge in these things. Yeah.
Yeah. I was
I
thinking.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, no, no. I was just thinking about the point. I don't know which point it is in terms of the 10 points for reparation, but apology. You know,
Number one.
I feel like that's number one, right? So I feel like
Yes.
our government owe us an apology.
An
You
apology.
know, we shouldn't wait for of course, that is it's critical, but the people who lead us, who we choose to lead us, who themselves have chosen to uphold the structures. Of course, they've inherited things, and maybe it's just not changing fast enough, you know, as fast as some of us would like it. There's some incremental change, but is it meaningful change? You know, I feel like we need a kind of radical, well, the apology first, and a radical departure from what has obtained, and really just kind of get down to brass tacks, and you
But
know
Dawn, why would the European countries? I mean, connected to what
but
we're
well,
talking
that
about.
that
Yeah.
they still it's by design, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you were really serious about having unique identities on these Caribbean islands, yes, people are kind of slowly becoming republics, and but there's so much um, resistance in a lot of places, and the higher realms of government in a lot of places, because this keeps the boat afloat. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
financially, those structures, the people benefit from things, from the status quo, in other words, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're benefiting from things the way they are. So why upset it? Me, what apology to who for what? And a
And
lot of
I
the
always think it's a two-way thing, eh? because they
Yeah,
benefiting, but we also benefit because it's an escape for us to not to do the kind of work we need to do. To pick up
exactly.
arms
And
and say,
yeah,
yeah, this
you
is
know,
the
the
kind of
arms.
society we want to create, and this is what we're going to do, and we're going to take up arms. I see Akley smiling, take up arms to to do that, to make those changes.
Listen, my approach to how things could be or could go is very different, and the idea of taking up arms nowadays, like you have to be, I think you have to be very like conscious of the words you use when you
Mm-hmm.
take up arms is one thing, but the casualty of taking up those arms is another thing. That said, like what's going on in the world right now when it comes to like Israel and Palestine is a thing that is like it's not a thing that we want in our country. It's not a thing that we want in our communities, and it's definitely something that we recognize and something that we seem to like like we know the possibility of it because we were born from it, and we understand it. We understand what it means to be ostracized and to be pushed out of your place and to feel like you don't have rights. We understand that it's in our genetic memory, but to feel like tyranny and control is what's necessary to foster change is not
Mm-hmm.
is not the example that I think works. I lived in Cuba for 3 years. I went to school there, and I'm fluent in Spanish as well. It opened up a lot of like things for me in terms of like how I see the world. Like learning another language. And at the same time, what I think is most important is cooperation, is people like figuring out how to do things together. There is
Mm-hmm.
this thing about especially in film and idea creation, about when you have an idea and you send it to this person and this person and this person, how the idea grows, like the hive mind. Like I really believe in that, of like the power of working together to come up with
Mm-hmm.
solutions. And yeah, I feel like somewhere along the line, right, the older generation betrayed us and sort of like, how I just see it, especially in my country, is like some of the people like took off the dashiki from the movement back in the day, and they put on
Mm-hmm.
jacket and tie, and they kind of like sell out. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we have as politicians right now. That's what we have. And sometimes, well, I'm sure some of you guys, play chess. It's about staying on the board, so you could do a
Mm-hmm.
run around and have the person, just build up the power and keep the game going because you're the king, you know. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's the kind of politics we have throughout the Caribbean. And many of the examples of freedom fighters and people who took up arms did that. And it's not only in the Caribbean, it's across the world. So somehow we have to like sort of like
But
invite something new to manifest that is
yeah,
not
yeah.
violence or fight. Like I don't think it should be about fighting. It
It
should be
shouldn't
about
be
coming
that
together.
because when I said take up arms, and I take your point about the language, I really wasn't
Hmm.
saying like physical arms. I was saying like
No,
us
for sure.
getting up and getting to the things that we need to do to make that shift. So I take your point about the language,
Hmm.
but for me it wasn't that because I really don't see myself taking up arms, that kind of thing. But it's about
Hmm.
developing the fearlessness and the courage to step up to do what we know we need to do. Because all of
Hmm.
us know, nobody needs to come and tell us this is what we need to do. But it's somehow there is that missing step where we don't seem to be able to take that first step to stick your hand out to say let's build a community, and in that community this is what we're going to do. And that for me is the critical thing in terms of changing, in terms of healing, in terms of doing for ourselves and not waiting for others to do for us, because we have what we need, so it's just working it.
Yeah. Don, do you have anything you want to
Yeah.
share? I want to give my thoughts time to.
Well,
Come out.
that's kind of how I at the work we're doing, right? Um, so that, for instance, having young people interview older people and that kind of thing. We kind of arrest, the loss of memory. Um, we maybe through interview protocols to confront some of the betrayal of the older generation, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we're bringing them together. And it's a two-way exchange, right? So they are also learning from the younger generation. They are learning
Mm-hmm.
to navigate the world as it is today. You always hear the old refrain, "Oh, a long time was this and that, and everything was great." But that's the function of nostalgia, right? It just kind of makes things seem nicer. Everything was better back in the halcyon days of their youth, but not really looking at trauma and abuse that was commonplace, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is that a lot of people are still living with those things, but because the older people have elevated it as this kind of romantic or romanticized it, then we continue to accept a lot of subpar things in the society, you know. Um, and I know I might sound like I'm contradicting what I said earlier, but I feel like the um the the conversations have to be happening. They have to be happening constantly. We're losing too many people, you know. Every day somebody passes away that the person born that day would not benefit from their knowledge. The other day I asked my dad, I said, how do you know the things you know? Like, start writing down a list of the things you know. Like, some very kind of weird pieces of knowledge that are just fabulous solutions. He's very creative, but I stuff I wouldn't think of. Like, oh, you know that. And if everybody were to compile a list of 10 things that they know, 10 things that I know how to do before I die, um, and we put that somewhere that is accessible to everybody. It's not something that you want people to pay for. This is just common folk knowledge. And I guarantee you, the number of similarities and patterns and just general knowledge that that will emerge, I think we would all be richer for it. And then we could say, look, this is key. This particular thing, I don't know what it is right now, but I'm sure it will emerge that this is something central to us, to our identity. This particular piece of knowledge is what makes us who we are and makes us able to overcome these challenges. But because we're so fragmented right now, and by design, like, we're distracted with a lot of stuff, um, we're not kind of, it's not required of us to be focused, to be conscious in a lot of ways,
Intentional.
and to be intentional and to be mindful and to be mindful of each other, so that the absence things just means that we're inhabiting spaces and we're not creating places, and that's what I would like for our communities and our country as a whole, and the Caribbean by extension.
I had always seen Trinidad, like coming through an airport is like coming through a portal, like like if you're on a spaceship and doors open, you're coming in like a vortex, and then the wall opening, and I'd always seen it as a sort of like a hub between Latin America or between the Spanish wall and the English Caribbean. That's how I saw it, especially and it got reinforced, like Because when I was going to school in Cuba, I would have to come to Trinidad and get copa and go to Panama, you know. And as a Vinci, that was amazing because, St. Vincent only had Liat. And it's only that we see him going and coming. So, to sort of like the journey out of this kind of remote island into the outer world. I always saw Trinidad as a kind of like a hub. So seeing Spanish on the walls sort of like prepared me for that. And eventually, when I got the news of what was going on in Venezuela, you know, I was prepared for it. But by the time I got back to Trinidad, you know, I was like I was there before when I was only speaking English, and I saw all the signs. And when I visited later after I had learned Spanish, it started to like stand out, like walking down the street and you just hearing lots of Spanish people, and
Yes.
I imagine like it could be very interesting for Trinidadians, in Trinidad, like what's
Yeah.
really going on here. But I think
Yeah.
the fact that the airport had those signs is insight that somebody had when they designed this space, right? And what they were doing is preparing for this eventuality, because it makes sense that we should trade with our neighbors, but because
Yeah.
we grew up in the paradigm of the British, right? We listen to British media, but we don't listen or give ourselves a chance to listen to Spanish radio 10 minutes from us to find out what opportunities exist for us to take advantage of because of our location. And that is the thing that kind of like kept us economically divided, socially divided, culturally divided. And it's catastrophe has
Mm-hmm.
bringing us together. And that is interesting when you really look at the dynamics, because these people are looking for opportunities and a way to a better life, you know? And that's what Trinidad looks like to them, which is also interesting because to me, Trinidad looks like a
Yeah.
scary place with all those big guns and all of that. Like to
But
me,
part of it, I think, is recognizing the history between the spaces, because when you look at the colonial history, Trinidad at the time always traded with Venezuela for
yeah.
food and different things, when you look at that. So it's a continuation. And then when you look at the indigenous people who always moved from Venezuela straight up the Caribbean, Trinidad was always that stopping off point.
Between
So part of it, I think, too, is recognizing that history,
Mhm.
and it's coming in a new format, but it's not new for me in that sense, because this has obtained over the time. Yeah.
But Erica, you talk about recognizing the history, and
Mhm.
Akley talked about his perspectives of Trinidad coming in, I guess, as a non-Trinidadian. And I think it's also recognizing the history is also a part of recognizing the need to rewrite or reorient the history. So, for example, I always wonder why it is we have never even engaged in a discussion about the name of our capital city. Like, in my opinion, the fact that we continue to carry the name Port of Spain is ludicrous. It's ridiculous
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
Trinidad didn't even end up being a Spanish colony in the end. But the fact that we are a port of Spain, and there has not been. My thing is, if there was a discussion about it, and people decide, you know what, for whatever reason, we decide that this is the best path to continue on, fine. But there has never been a discussion on it. And it's the same thing for our second largest city, San Fernando, right? So
San Fernando. Yep.
these names
Hmm.
were given to us, but do they function in the way that they're supposed to function for an independent nation, an independent Caribbean multicultural nation going forward? And what does it say that we continue to hold on, to these names as if they are something to
They've
be
been,
a badge of
yeah,
honor? Yeah.
they've been given to
yeah.
us, so therefore we cannot move them. Yeah.
I mean, and you look at the examples of tons of countries from Zimbabwe to Azerbaijan to,
Yeah.
Nigeria, who built
Benin,
Nigeria,
as we
and
heard
Brazil, who
today.
built
Yes.
whole new capitals with whole new names. It's been done before. So it's not like it's something that is out of the ordinary, it's possible.
Well, in the case of St.
Status
Vincent,
quo has to,
go ahead.
See that again, Dawn? You broke up.
no, I was saying the status quo has to be preserved because you know
I don't know
that's
what the
how
because is, but I
life.
hear you.
Yeah,
There is no
yeah,
because. It's the same reason why the statue of Columbus continues to stand behind the Roman Catholic Cathedral
The
in
Roman Catholic
Spain.
Cathedral.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Pride of
one
place.
one bag of flour could lick that statue down, easy, right? But we continue to leave the statue there. So
Yeah.
All,
Waiting
all,
for permission.
all they have
Yes.
a statue of Columbus for you?
yes,
Why?
yeah.
I would
We
like
should
to know why too, Akley, if you could help us out.
somebody should have
So we
done
still
defeat that. During George Floyd, Black Lives Matter should have deal with that. What happened?
I
What
agree.
happened?
Yeah.
I
We
agree.
waiting for permission.
Like we call Trinidad. Let we go down in yeah. What we call it?
I agree. I don't think it would take very much to topple that statue,
To
honestly.
topple that statue. We know that. Remember, we'd given them ideas. Let me talk for myself. I had given ideas about what could be done. We don't incriminate you, Sean.
There is a group who has been lobbying for it, but they have requested that the Port of Spain City Corporation remove it rather than going the Trinidad route, actually.
Trinidad, yes. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But actually, you have a film called Sugarlands.
Mhm. So that film was I guess it's something that came out of my I guess my search to figure out who I am. I make this
Mm-hmm.
content, I put it out, and it's the world responding to that, and the
Mm-hmm.
University of Wales reached out, and they came out with like a revelation, explaining that the history of this place, Camden Park, comes from this story of a guy who took his money from reparations and donated it to creating a university. And the university was celebrating 200 years, and in light of everything that happened, George Floyd and everything that happened, they too decided to confront their colonial legacy. And yeah, it's just an interesting anomaly that just kind of like manifested i- in the time. The thing that's interesting about it is that the university's vice chancellor was at that time was Prince Charles, and
Mm.
he allegedly, he had made visits to St. Vincent, like 2019, I think, and he got a sense of how things were, and he in his own way seems to be like like maybe as the king, you know, he has a role he has to play, but he also has, like, if you want to say, a shadow side as a human being, and the shadow side sometimes try to like use his influence to make certain things happen. And I think he suggested that the university confronts its past and do something for St. Vincent, especially after the volcano erupted, and it manifested in this confrontation of the past in the form of an offer of scholarships that turned out to be the equivalent of what the man's investment was in the past. You know,
Hmm.
like his
Mm-hmm.
£4,000 today is like £1 million, and
Mm-hmm.
so they gave 36 Vincentian scholarships to come and do bachelors and masters, and they also well, they wanted a film to sort of like explain the program, but I said, before we do anything, we have to drop this news on the Vinci them, because it was news to me. I had no idea about this, so I was like, what? I was like, before anything, the people of St. Vincent need to know. So I said, before we make a PSA, let we explain it to the people. And Dr. Adrian Fraser, who is featured in the film, he's actually a historian. He's like St. Vincent's most credible historian right now, right? And he So I was born in 1988, and I go on Google and Google him and find his PhD thesis, which happens to be on the history of Saint Vincent, right? Um, it was the 1935 riots, right? Right. So he submitted his PhD thesis in 1988, like the year I was born. So that is just to tell you, the giant that this man is, when in terms of like his knowledge and what he understands about the past and how Saint Vincent and what. And my first encounter with him is these articles that he writes in the newspaper, kind of reflecting on the past and the present. He's in a way kind of like trying to remind people of this fighting soul, this indigenous soul, this soul that wants to correct the wrongs. He's one of those persons. And the film literally shares his research that he was doing in collaboration with the university. And ultimately, it sort of like uses the opportunity of the royals' visit. Is this one time when it filled my heart with pride to say a handful of my people came out with placards and everything, and they confronted and said, we don't want all your hair. And I managed to capture some moments of the average Vincentian, explaining their ideas on reparations and wanting an apology and demanding justice. So that's what the film is about. That's how it came to be as well. And it's a testament of the kind of work I would like to continue producing, work that is about healing, is about confronting some of these things that could allow us to know a little bit more about the space that we grew up in. Because, like you mentioned earlier, our education falls short. And when you look at it, the education is the colonial's story. It's not the indigenous story or the African story. And that's what we teach, and that's what we kind of like project to the future, unless, like you say, we take up arms. In my case, it's a camera. Okay.
Yeah. My case is my voice,
Exactly.
and I could walk hard. So
Look at Mark.
It sounds like we need to get Akley and Dawn together to do something
to do some work.
connected
Yes.
to Project Namescapes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly.
I know. So
Maybe
I think
so
that's
many
that's great.
I mean, St. Vincent
that
is a
could be
great
done on.
place to like do a project of decolonializing. And
Yes.
I know the prime minister is very like, he's a big fan of it, but sometimes when it comes to translating on the ground, politics
Mm-hmm.
gets in the way.
Yep.
And I remember him saying he wanted the opposition to unite with him on this thing, and they should do a full renaming of all the streets, like take down all the colonial, names and
Mm-hmm.
create new names. And I thought that's brilliant. And
Mm-hmm.
they also restarted a reparations commission. And well, I was told that I was nominated to be on the reparations commission, but I'm still
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out what they want me to do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's been a few
Sounds
months.
about right. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that has been the challenge when dealing with like government, even though they have great ideas. So I
It's
welcome any project. you
Yeah,
know.
so we will talk. So people, it's 9:20. It means we are an hour and 20 minutes into this conversation. Any final words? Because I'm getting to wrapping us up, right? So any final words?
Um, yeah, I think for me, I would like to see that this whole thing about names really is about us coming to terms with what took place in the spaces that we live, right? The histories that we do know, which continue to manifest or exist in the names that we have. But there's so much history and so many stories that we don't know, the silenced or unheard stories. And I
Yeah.
think, a big part of this work that we're all involved in is about taking the necessary steps, the courageous steps, as Erica says, to ensure that these silenced, unheard stories um, get an outlet. Yeah, are able to be in some form heard. And I think one of those first steps is definitely us explaining to people, first of all, why these names are here. How did they get here in the first place? In the first place, and then having a real, honest, frank national discussion about what it means for us, and if we're prepared to continue into the future with these names on our, these names representing the species that we live in.
Mm-hmm. Thanks,
Um,
Sean.
for me, healing is about for me, more than anything else, healing is about like finding a way to like ground yourself, and it's like whether it's psychological or physical, like how do you discover what your comfort is, and what conditions are you comfortable in, and that's inside and outside, and part of it is not being at conflict with yourself. Like I accept my whole, somebody's knocking at the door. I accept my I accept my whole colonial, like legacy, the good
Yeah.
and the bad all together. And I don't hold on a minute, please. I don't hold on a minute, please. I don't put any sort of like I don't put the stress and the trauma of feeling that division that exists in the world or in history in myself, whether whatever the conditions are that created me, like I accept them, but I'm moving forward as a whole person, you know, and that for me is like discovering how to feel comfortable with whatever it is,
Yeah.
that create the conditions that you come from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to
Sean? Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah, I was thinking about it was freezing up a little bit. Sorry about that. You know, I I suspect in a lot of ways we, or the powers that be, don't want to confront our past in terms of reparations, in terms of healing, because I suspect they feel that it's does not inclusive enough, or they don't want to, you know, um, let's see what I'm looking for. They don't want to prod or poke at one sector of the population because we have a diverse society. So I suspect they feel like, well, just leave it so now everybody already familiar with it, you know, regardless of what the meaning of some of those place names do to us in ways that we're not ready to confront in a lot of ways. You know, we have to confront them, but I feel like a lot of the people in charge of these things and to announce a committee in terms of looking at the place names and so on. But who knows how long that will take. We still don't have our own reparations committee, like an official one. We have a lot of people on the ground doing work, healing work in the community, doing a lot of public engagement work. But as an official position, Trinidad and Tobago doesn't have an official reparations committee. So again, we're always kind of threading the needle. One foot in, one foot out. You know, we gonna do some stuff, yes, but we have many different points of view to consider, and we constantly kind of going around in circles. You know, because again, like uh, um, Trinidad has kind of in its history been this transient spot. People kind of pass through Trinidad. They come here, they live, they make some money, but it's a stepping stone to somewhere else, and that sentiment still kind of pervades, you know, the kind of psychic realities of this place, you know. So you'll go to school and you'll get your
I think Dawn fell
Oh,
off.
Dawn fell off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
But Erica, I
And
wanted
so.
to respond quickly
Mhm,
to something that Dawn was saying,
mhm,
which is I think I don't, in my opinion, I don't want us as a Caribbean people to, because especially in a space like Trinidad, because of the
mhm,
diversity, to think that confronting the exercise of power in terms of
mhm,
naming spaces, um,
mhm,
that has anything to do with not respecting diversity or not attending to
mhm,
diversity. Because
mhm,
I'll give an example. The Orange Grove estate here in Tacarigua did not only affect, it affected multiple people. So it affected
yeah.
people,
The
Africans
indigenous.
who were enslaved,
Uh-huh.
the indigenous who were brought here, and Lord
Mhm,
alone knows who else. So I think the issue is not so much that touching these names are going to maybe sideline some people and favor others. I think it's about really the powers that be not having the testicular fortitude or seeing the need for confronting things that need to be confronted. It's easier to just leave it as it is and
mhm,
not have a discussion. But at the end of the day, all of us are impacted by it. All of us um, have been affected in one way or another by it. And the fact that I live in a place, a neighborhood that is, or an area that is called Paradise, that was the name of the estate. That must have some kind of as Don was saying, psychic, psychological, emotional, spiritual
mhm,
impact on me
mhm,
that I don't even realize that I think needs to be addressed.
mhm. And so thank you. And so as we go through, I think the important thing is for each of us to take responsibility for our healing, doing some of the things we know that we can do for ourselves, and also intentionally building community that can help us to heal. Because I think we have agency, we have power, there are things we can do outside of the system, and the onus is on us to do some of those things. So heal, be good to ourselves, take time to breathe, take time to own all of who we are, because that is what brings the richness and reaching out and building community, as I said. So I want to thank you. Thank you, Dawn and Akley and Sean. Thank you for this opportunity to share. We will stay in touch. So I want to wish you all the best. Have a good night. Have a good weekend and enjoy it's a good week, not weekend, week. Yes. So thank you so much.
thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening.